Were MK Ultra mind control techniques used to fake the entire alien abduction phenomenon?
A well-known ufologist named Carla Turner received thousands of communications from people who claimed that they had been abducted by aliens. They woke up to see aliens inside their bedroom. They felt that the aliens sort of mesmerized them with their hypnotic eyes. They were floated up to a UFO, examined, probed, in some cases tortured. They would have random orgasms, and then they would have implants placed. And then after these experiences, the same people would experience telepathy, psychic events. Some of them would even see apocalyptic events. So here we have a bunch of elements of alien abduction that completely defy belief. But so many people have claimed to have these experiences, I have no choice but to believe them. So then the question is, are aliens real? If they're not, then could all of these experiences have been faked?
Welcome to the Woo There It Is podcast.
Okay, I am not saying that all alien abduction experiences have been faked and that none of them were real and that aliens are a huge hoax. I'm not saying that, but I'm not saying it either. I think some of these things are worth consideration. That's all. So don't freak out. All right, back to the show. Okay, so I'm going to take a slight detour into the topic of MK Ultra. This is a project, the details of which are publicly available. But essentially the aim of the MK Ultra project was mind control. That was their stated aim. And their goal was to create a Manchurian Candidate. That's essentially someone who can be going about their normal business and then receive a cue and then suddenly go into assassin mode, murder someone, they don't know who, and then return back to their normal business, having forgotten everything that they just did. That was the goal of this project that was sponsored by us. Pretty fucked up. But anyway, ultimately, the official story is that MK Ultra wasn't able to figure out how to actually control minds. It was a huge failure, and they shuttered the entire thing, officially. And so Martin Cannon went into a lot of the files from MK Ultra. Interestingly, his goal wasn't to prove that, A, they were a lot more successful with MK Ultra than they let on, and that they're still operating even to this day. This is in the 90s when he did this research. They're definitely not operating today. That wasn't his goal. No, Martin Cannon set out to prove that the modalities discovered during the MK Ultra project were now behind the entire alien abduction phenomenon. First, let's talk about an interesting event that took place in 1963 in Madrid, Spain. Neuroscientist Jose Manuel Rodriguez Delgado stood in a bullfighting ring. In the bullfighting ring was a bullfighter and a bull. The bull was charging the bullfighter, and he did his standard thing where he kind of waves the flag and then kind of dances to the side, and the bull somehow misses him. And then the bull recharged again and went straight towards the bullfighter once more. And once again, the bullfighter kind of waves his flag and then dances to the side. And then a third time, the bull decides to take another charge. And this time, as the bull is charging towards the bullfighter, it suddenly stops in its tracks. And all eyes in the stadium went directly to Jose Delgado, who was standing there with this metal box in his hand and a button on it that he was pushing. So earlier, Delgado had placed a tiny metal electrode into the caudate nucleus, into the brain of this bull. And all he had to do was stimulate that electrode, and it completely stopped the bull from making its attack. And this whole experiment made Delgado an overnight sensation until the public found a little bit more about him. Like I said, Delgado was a neuroscientist. his goal was to stop aggressive behavior. That was even if it meant shoving an implant into somebody's brain and forcing the issue. Interesting, to stop aggressive behavior with aggressive behavior. And he started with animals, but then he moved to psychiatric patients. And so he was putting this metal electrode, which he called a stimulation. He was putting it into the psychiatric patients' brains. And during these experiments, he was able to sort of stimulate the stimulation so that the patients felt feelings of floating. You know where this is going. It messed with their memories. And then he was also able to induce hallucinations. But he wasn't the only one. There was another scientist. His name was Robert G. Heath of Tulane University. And he would put the stimulation in the brains of homosexuals. And his goal was to turn them straight. So he used what's called operant conditioning. And so if the patient were to maybe look with lust, I guess, at a picture of an attractive male, then he would receive a shock. But then if he looked with lust at an attractive female, or any female, I guess, then he would receive, I'm assuming, some sort of nice feeling, perhaps an orgasm. And again, all of these things, you can see where the elements of alien abduction kind of come into play. But something I didn't mention earlier came from one of Carla Turner's abductees. Her name was Angie. And Angie said that an alien told her that she was part of a mind control project designed to carry instructions and temperance via thought transference. And then later on, she was told that one of the aims of the aliens was to remove filth, evil, and negativity from humans. And it's interesting to think how similar that is to what Jose Delgado seemed to have in mind with his stimulation project. And ultimately, and I mentioned earlier, he ultimately became rather unpopular. He wrote a book called, and you can find this on Amazon, Physical Control of the Mind Towards a Psycho-Civilized Society. Ultimately, Delgado would find that he really just couldn't make that much headway in the area of mind control. The brain was much more complicated than he'd originally thought, and so he shuttered the whole thing. That's his official story. Right. So with that in mind, let's pivot to a not often talked about case of what would appear to be mind control. On March 2nd, 1967, in the capital of the Philippines, Manila, a 24-year-old gentleman named Luis Angel Castillo was arrested by the Filipino authorities under suspicion of planning to assassinate the president of the Philippines. And immediately after he was arrested, he just sort of surrendered, gave up. He said, "I'll tell you everything. And I recommend that you even give me truth serum. I'll tell you anything you want." And his philosophy was he was dead either way. And so you might as well just give it all up. And of course, that's a little bit unusual for a captured prisoner, but there were a lot of unusual things about Luis Castillo. So unusual that for the purposes of the next several weeks of interrogation, the Filipino authorities brought in a psychiatrist. After talking to him for just a little bit about his plan to assassinate their president, they had a few questions for the American FBI. So the Filipino authorities were pretty quickly able to track Castillo back to the United States. The FBI flew in. They had a closed-door meeting with them. And then afterwards, the entire story was kind of shut down in the press. But they didn't stop their interrogation of Luis Castillo. And over the next few weeks, they learned quite a lot about him. All 7 of them. So during this interrogation, Castillo was gotten drunk. He was put under hypnosis, which he fell under hypnosis pretty easily. He was given truth serum. And, well, that's it. Those 3 things. And pretty soon, the psychiatrist who was interrogating him started pulling out these different personalities. So Castillo would just go into a different mode and suddenly have an entirely different name, an entirely different history, and an entirely different personality that the psychiatrist would be interacting with. And there was no telling which of these personalities was his true self, but there was one central theme that ran across all of his personalities, and that was the presence of one woman. And he told about how this woman had accompanied him, I guess in one of his personalities, had accompanied him every day when he went to the factory. And what he did there, we'll never know, but he seemingly had a romantic relationship with this woman. But at the same time, he described hating her, which that could be kind of normal. He described kind of hating her. And the psychiatrist, after all of this interviewing with him, said that whoever she was, she controlled Castillo's consciousness like a nightmare. So what was she doing with this control? Well, for one thing, Castillo had been programmed to kill on command, either somebody else or himself. So when he was arrested, the Filipino authorities found this sheet of paper with a string of letters written on it. I'm just going to put it here on the screen, or I'm going to put it on somewhere on the screen. I don't know why, but the hypnotist would put Castillo under hypnosis, and then he would read out the letters to Castillo, and nothing happened. And then he would read out the letters with pauses in certain places to Castillo, and nothing happened. And finally, the therapist realized that when he paused between the letters G and U, suddenly Castillo said, "I am myself to kill." And when the therapist said X, Castillo said, "Maurizio." BGU, "I am myself." MI, to kill. Maybe he was just playing, who knows, but this is freaky. And then at one point, the therapist says to him his name, Luis Castillo. And immediately, without hesitation, Castillo takes his gun, points at his head, and shoots. Unfortunately, it wasn't loaded, but that was what he'd been programmed to do. And I didn't mention this earlier, but on the day that he was supposedly going to have murdered the Filipino president, he tried to commit. He swallowed like a bottle of glue or something. So this guy is completely under somebody's control. And it's terrifying and also rather fascinating. But what's nuts is that Castillo didn't even know, or at least he claimed that he didn't even know that he had all of these sub-personalities. And when the therapist told him about it, Castillo was like, oh no, what if one of my other personalities were to get into contact with Papa? Another personality might actually kill Papa. And that would be terrible because, you know, if Papa were murdered, it would send the entire agency into hysterics. What is he talking about? Who's Papa? Papa apparently he claimed was his real father. And the only reason I include that detail is because doesn't that sound a lot like Stranger Things? And for those of you who don't know, there's a mental institute or like an institution where little psychic kids are messed with. And the head of it is called Papa. They all call the head, psychiatrist or whoever he is, Papa. And so it's just kind of weird. Anyway, I'm sure during those weeks of interrogation, there were a lot of people who were involved, who were in a constant state of shock seeing the state of this man. But nothing had them prepared for what they found out about Castillo's activities on November the 22nd, 1963. Okay, most of you probably don't know what I'm talking about. That's the day Kennedy was killed. Castillo, while he was under hypnosis, told the story about how one day a group of men brought him into this building and it had a window. And they gave him a gun And they said there's a gentleman who's going to be riding in a car, in an open car, around the corner over there, and we're going to flash a light at you twice. And when we flash that light at you twice, then we want you to shoot him. So Castillo was like, okay, because he's totally controlled. So he stood there waiting at the window. After a while, he didn't do anything, but after a while, one of the gentlemen came back and said, they got him already. And he took Castillo away. And the next thing Castillo knows, he's waking up in a hotel room, and there's the woman again there to drive into, I guess, his next assignment. But he said in the car ride on the radio, he heard the news of President Kennedy having been assassinated. It's an interesting story. Who knows how true it is, but it's definitely gives you food for thought. But here's another thing, and this is the last part of his story that might give food for thought. And that is that when Castillo, during one of the sessions, when he was given truth serum, Castillo said the following.
The NBI,
which is the Filipino FBI,
are suckers. They thought they arrested me, but there I was, waiting for them to get me. I know of a great plot. I am supposed to expose it after I'm arrested. I know I will eventually return to my country,
which was the US in this particular personality's case.
I'll go through the motions of a trial, conviction, and jail. After a couple of months, I will be released for my next assignment.
And that's exactly what happened. He was returned to the United States. He went on trial, was sent to jail, except he spent a few years in jail, I believe. But then after he was released, he completely disappeared, and I don't think anybody knows whatever happened to him after that. Make of it what you will. How does all of this relate to alien abduction? Well, for one thing, if you can literally control a person's mind to the extent that they believe in an entirely false history, then couldn't you implant an entire memory of having been abducted by aliens? So far, all I've talked about as far as the modalities that they might have used, all I've talked about are electrical implants. But Bauer was able to find a couple of other modalities. And believe me, we're not done with the human rights atrocities. I have to share that when I was in college, around the year 2000, there was a traveling hypnotist, and he came to campus, and pretty much, I would say all the students went to go watch the hypnotist show. It was like maybe on a Saturday night or something. And he got around 10 students on stage, and he put them under hypnosis, and then he got them to do a bunch of little funny things. But at one point, he literally got them to do something very strange, and what was even stranger was that nobody seemed to be thrown by it. He told them that there was a ball. It was an imaginary ball underneath their chairs. And if they picked up the ball and they bounced it on their knee, they would have an orgasm. And so then he told them, bounce the ball on your knee. And, you know, you could see the students, all of them, just bouncing the ball happily on their knees. And in their heads, they're having like orgasms. And all the students are laughing. And I guess it was kind of funny, but essentially he's humiliating these people on stage in front of their peers. And one kid, after the hypnosis show was over, one kid just walked out of the auditorium. And so the reason I bring this up is that he was able to get these people to completely humiliate themselves in public after just 10 minutes of hypnosis. So if that's true, then what can you get somebody to do after a lot longer than 10 minutes and LSD? Cannon researched a lot of the files from the MKUltra project. And in the files, he found one handwritten note that doesn't have a signature. I mean, it could be total bunk, but I feel like it's worth some consideration.
I have developed a technique which is safe and secure, free from international censorship. It has to do with the conditioning of our own people. I can accomplish this as a one-man job. The method is the production of hypnosis by means of simple oral medication. Then, with no further medication, the hypnosis is reinforced daily during the following 3 or 4 days. Each individual is conditioned against revealing any information to an enemy, even though subjected to hypnosis or drugging. If preferable, he may be conditioned to give false information rather than no information.
Kind of makes you wonder back to that Luis Castillo case. I wonder if he just told a bunch of lies. Who knows? But let's move on. In 1957, a woman named Velma Orlikow was experiencing postpartum depression. So she checked herself into the Allen Memorial Institute. This was a prestigious psychiatric institute. Her psychiatrist was very well known, very highly regarded. And so much so that she was a little bit nervous to be his patient, and she wanted to basically be worthy of him treating her because he was, devoting his attention towards her. And so when he walked into the room and he had a syringe labeled lysergic acid diethylamide, well, yeah, she hesitated a little bit to have something injected into her that she'd never heard of. But ultimately, she decided to let him do what he needed to do because he was the doctor and she trusted him. That would be the first of a series of many experimental and highly unethical treatments, I would say, that Dr. Ewan Cameron would inflict on Val Orlikow, and she would never be the same again.
And I just felt that my life was threatened. I could never go back to what I'd been.
So in addition to receiving drugs like LSD, patients at the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University were also subjected to this kind of electroshock treatment. It can be done in a way that is beneficial, but let's hear what Dr. Cameron had them doing.
Depatterning is a use of electroshock treatment in which, instead of giving the shocks, say 2 or 3 times a week, they're given 2 or 3 times a day, reducing the patient to a sort of animal, vegetable state.
They were also subjected to something called psychic driving, where they had to kind of listen to the same recording being played again and again, like 24/7. I listened to just a clip of something that was being played, and that almost made me go nuts. So I can't even imagine what this was like for these patients. And this all is publicly available information. The reality of these experiments has come out, and the fact that it was being funded secretly, by the way, funded by the CIA, is all a matter of public record. This is not conspiracy theory. But the point of me saying all of this is that Dr. Ewan Cameron was using electroshock therapy, which was designed to erase the mind. He was using psychic driving, which was designed to implant ideas and thoughts into the mind. And then he was using drugs like LSD. And let's hear what one patient had to say about that.
One minute I would see the doctor there, the next minute I wouldn't see him there, and I remember them telling me that I was getting smaller and smaller, and I really felt myself getting smaller. They were bringing me back in time. At one point I almost felt like I was just about to be born.
Once again, this project was shuttered, and they didn't have any luck. They didn't find anything that actually was beneficial or worked, or it was all just a huge waste of time, just tortured a bunch of patients. That's the official story. But I can see how a lot of those modalities might be used to convince somebody that they have been abducted by aliens. I can see that. Again, I'm not saying that that's what it is, but it's worth some thought. But here's my question. Why? So other than being able to completely manipulate somebody's mind, I have to say that the parallels between the goals of the MK Ultra project and what we're seeing with the entire alien abduction phenomenon don't totally link together for me. I'm still very open to the idea that the alien abduction phenomenon is real and it's happening exactly as it's being reported, especially since you don't see a lot of alien abductees, I don't think, that have like multiple personality syndrome or that seem to be able to kill on cue or anything like that. But what are the things that we do see in the alien abduction phenomenon that might be avenues for manipulation. For one thing, there does seem to be a common theme of alien abductees having visions of future apocalyptic events. And this has been happening since the 50s. So why implant these visions? And I can't answer that question, but Martin Cannon said something in his monograph that really caught my attention. And that's because I've had personal experience with this. Cannon said that one of the abductees said that her entities, and it kind of sounds like guides in sort of new age lingo. So she communicates with some sort of entity, which you would expect to be higher order. But her entities pointed her towards this particular group. They wanted her to join this group who would engage in what's called sky watching activities. I assumed the sky watching was to look for UFOs. During these activities, they would engage in mass channeling events. Channeling generally is when you allow something else into you to kind of speak through you or communicate through you. Could be sketchy, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not saying it's terrible, but could be. And this particular group that she had been guided to join was run by a person named Virgil Armstrong. And he was sort of your classic love and light guru, who also was a former Green Beret and also former CIA. That's all. Nothing to see here. And he was good friends with General John Singlaub, who has kind of a sketchy history himself. And so it's a little odd. They would be running essentially this cult. And Cannon has a few other examples, but the reason I bring it up is because I go to these skywatching events, local skywatching events. So after the book that Chris Bledsoe wrote about being able to see, orbs and things like that, I found out about a local group. They literally, on maybe a monthly basis, will meet, have a chit chat, and then go out to a field and look for UFOs, or actually maybe even call them in. But I did notice during the meeting, at least in the beginning, they talk about one of the prophecies that Chris Bledsoe has. And I talked about it here, but just a really quick recap. Chris Bledsoe saw the lady, the sort of spiritual entity who would come to him and give him prophecies, often on Easter Sunday. And in 2019, she said to him that we were entering a 7-year biblical period of tribulation described in the book of Revelation. It will end, she said,
when the red star Regulus in the constellation of Leo rises just before dawn at eye level of the space.
Good Lord, these are a lot of stipulations.
On the horizon of the Giza Plateau in Egypt.
That's so... and I'm not making fun of it, but that is kind of funny. But who knows? Maybe she's really saying something there. But that's this Easter. Literally, I think that's this Easter Sunday of the year April 2026. When it comes to prophecies like these, frankly, we've heard a lot of them. If you are into paranormal like I am, there's been a lot of prophecies that have never come to pass. Some of them that have. I believe the birth of Jesus was prophesied. That was kind of a big deal. But I just kind of take this stuff with a grain of salt. But this group, what I thought was a little bit odd was that it was almost like they were a little bit religious about it, or at least not all of them. And so it gave me pause. And now to find out that there may actually be perhaps some sort of weird conspiracy to guide spiritual-minded people, alien abductees, towards cults, it just gives me pause for thought. I don't know what the purpose of that would be, but anyway, with that, I leave you to ponder, and I will see you next space and time.